DDM 2024.07 sees some significant changes to the SolidWorks interface. One of the enhancements is the ability to load a part straight into an existing part. So if I go to the DDM menu here, we see that we've reduced the number of options in this window. I'm going to do a search and open to go back to the database. And what I'd like to do is put this roller bearing and bring it as a part within a part. If I use the double click to load, we see this is a brand new load window. The first thing is it will tell us whether we already have the file local or not. So I've already loaded this into session, so it won't physically bring the file back again. So it's much more intelligent than the previous load window. We also have the ability here to close the window after load automatically. Now I'm not going to switch this on for now, but I can see that I can load this part as a subpart into the existing window. Now because I chose not to close the window automatically, it's giving me a summary here of how long it took to load that part. So now what we can see is we've managed to bring a part into an existing part as opposed to as a subpart of an assembly. Okay, I'm going to undo that because that's not actually what I want. So the next thing I'd like to do is I've been working on an assembly, and as you can see, the assembly that I'm working on contains this plate part at the bottom. So I've built this assembly from two existing parts and a new part that is currently not known to DDM. I'm going to go in and search the database, search and open. And the last thing I want to bring in is a shaft to bring it in as a subpart of my assembly. Now this is the one that I'm looking for, so I double click or open. So I'm going to double click, and again we get the new load window. I want to load this as a subpart as opposed to loading it in its own window. So load as subpart. Again we get the load summary. I'm going to turn that off next time. Okay, and I want to bring that shaft, so you can see here we've got the default selector that SolidWorks provides so that you can position the part that you're bringing into session. I'm just going to align this to complete my assembly like so. Okay, so this is my new assembly, quite simple. Okay, and I say okay. So now what I'd like to do, and we can see here that this part, part number 1, is currently not known to DDM. We've reduced the number of save options within the DDM interface, and this first save option, as opposed to save copy as or configurations, this is the standard save. We call this the single save. If I select save, we have to give this assembly a file, and we automatically pick up the file. Let me just say save all. Now we get a progress window is what appeared in the background. Now the difference with this single save window is we get to see everything that we've got loaded within our assembly. As we can see, it's a new assembly and this is a new part. So we've highlighted the required attributes. Now in this window you can turn on and off your own attributes that you may have created yourself. Now I want to give this assembly a new number, so I could either second click in this cell, or what I could do is I could go to my number selector. So I'm going to select my number. Now I'm going to give this a default part number. Okay, I can click into my description. This is my bearing housing assembly, and it's just for demonstration. Okay, and I'm going to select a category. Now on selecting a category, I'm going to filter down to find the correct category. This is a bearing housing assembly special, and I'm going to say OK. So I'm completing my attributes here. I want to do the same for this part here and say OK. I'm going to make this my bearing housing assembly, and this is the base plate. OK. I'm going to put it in a category for now. I'm just going to put it in a temporary category. OK, so I've managed to fill in the details without having to necessarily go into individual properties screens. Now, what I could have done is I could multi-select the items that need dealing with. I could have reserved them both at the same time. Let's do that. So I want to reserve both of them onto my workbench. So I can single or multi-select in this environment to make decisions on my save process. I could have categorized them together and I could have numbered them together. Okay, so lots more functionality and much more visual within this environment. These are both new parts. If we now look to the right-hand side of the single save window, we do have the ability now to turn on and off the generation of thumbnail images, the generation of neutral files. Now, these neutral files will be based on whatever you've set at an admin level for neutral files on save. We can also now turn on and off the generation of mask properties. Okay, lots of businesses don't do mask properties and there is an overhead on the save, so you now have the option to turn this on and off. I also have the option here turned on to include drawings. And I keep this on by default because if I'm saving a part, that typically means that the part has changed, or the assembly, and therefore we should be saving the drawing as well. So I tend to leave this switched on by default. There's lots of other options in here. For example, only show the items that require attention. So if you're working on a very large assembly and the bits that you're having to save or make decisions on are further down the screen, it's a nice way of filtering that down. Okay, so I'm going to choose to save this, and as we see, we now have a save progress window showing us exactly what's happening and exactly how long the save took. Now, the overall time that we see here, 3 minutes 58 seconds, was including all of my explanation time. The actual time here was 1.859 seconds, not including the save window per item. So if I was to do this save again without, I say save, without filling in all the details, all I'm going to do, I'm going to force an overwrite on my base plate as well. So say overwrite that as well. So it's the same save, but as you can see this time, it only took 12.2 seconds. Again, this save summary window, and it shows us how long it takes to generate, update properties, generate neutral files, etc. So all of the details are in here as to how long each section of the save takes. We do have the option to turn this save summary off. Now, if I do that again, so in fact, I'm going to create a drawing. Let me create a drawing of my assembly. Okay, and I'm just going to use a simple 3-view drawing, like so. Okay, so I have my drawing. What I now want to do is save my drawing away. I'm going to pick up the file. We get our, and here I'm saving the drawing of this assembly. I can choose to keep the same number for my drawing as my assembly, but there is an option in here that says use parent part or assembly number, so it will do that automatically for you. I'm going to choose my category. I'm just going to put it in here, and again, I've got all my options available to me, and I'm just going to say save away. I need to reserve it to a folder. I'm going to reserve it to my workbench. Again, I get a save summary. This time, because it's a drawing, we've generated a neutral file of the drawing that took 1.81% of the save time. I'm going to save this a final time, because this time I'm going to choose the option to not show the summary page at the end of the save. Okay, so when the save progress finishes, it will disappear off the screen. Now, I'm going to go back to my assembly because I would like to go through the save process again, this time looking at the neutral file options. Okay, if we go into options here, we also have some additional options as to what we want to happen, and there are also defaults for saving the drawing. So if you've got that switched on, there are some options in here as to what the default behavior should be. Okay, so I'm just going to save again and save this away. Okay, now the next thing is to show you the neutral files option. So while I have this part or this assembly on the screen, I can go in and decide if I want any neutral files for this particular assembly. So this is not based on what's set at an admin level, but this is the user's individual choice as to whether they want to add a neutral file. I'm going to cancel that. I might want to go to this part. If I open this part in its own window, for example, it isn't a sheet metal part, but I could identify this as a sheet metal part. If I identify this as a sheet metal part, then it will create a DXF profile of this part automatically. If I choose neutral files, I might also want to add a step and a SAT file. They have now been added and they will automatically be updated each time I save this part. Okay, I'm going to close the part. Yes, I want to save my changes, and I will save my assembly away now, and it's identified that this part has changed and therefore it needs to be resaved. It's going to overwrite these items here, so I choose overwrite. Now the save process, what we're doing here is lots of people these days will be working remotely across a VPN connection, and that network will be a lot slower than if you're working on premise. We've introduced what we have called the DDM file uploader. There is a tool that now sits in the background of DDM. The reason for this is when I do my save, I'm going to force a save again. When I run my save now, as soon as the save progress has finished and my save has completed, the user can carry on working. Okay, even if the files are still uploading in the background to the server. So if you're doing a large assembly save and there's lots of files and you're working on a remote connection, these files will upload in the background. Therefore, we've eliminated the slow network performance on saving. So if I now go to my drawing, if we have multi-sheets, we can also select whether we want to have a DXF and which sheet the DXF will be. Now, I only have one sheet here on my drawing, but you could say, well, do I want a DXF for the second sheet? So if I had a second sheet here, I could choose that as my DXF sheet. So very useful for parts when you need DXF profiles. If I go back to my assembly, I'm going to reopen this part. So this part, we chose the option of creating a DXF. So if I say, because this is now a sheet metal part, I can add a profile, a flat pattern profile for this item. If I look at the properties of this part and I go to the attachments, I now have a DXF profile of that part. Very useful for sheet metal parts. If I open this, then it will open it into my e-drawings. So what we have now inside e-drawings is the DXF profile of this sheet metal part. Okay. The next thing to show is the clear working folder, but before we do that, in fact, I'm going to close my assembly and my drawing. We have a new clear working folder. Now I've added this to my button bar at the top of SolidWorks, but this is the DDM clear working folder. We've made this much more intelligent now, because when we run this command we get an interface showing us the files that are in our working folder. These are all green and therefore DDM server is up to date. If we look at the status field here, up to date in DDM. So it's safe to remove all of these files. If, for example, let me choose my my base plate. Which of those items is it? It's this one. I'm going to open this into session. Now if I'd modified this, for example, let me just add a chamfer. Let me exit that. So let me just, on this edge, add a 30mm. So I've made a change to this part. Now if I save this locally using the SolidWorks save and I close it, when I go to clear my working folder, it's now telling me that this part has been modified locally and has not been updated in DDM. If I don't see this and I choose to clear the working folder, it will warn me that there are files in my working folder that have not been saved. So much safer than the previous version. I'm going to choose yes with that. But if I choose yes and I do delete it accidentally, we've got a backup of the working folder. So we see this backup section in the clear working folder window that we will keep the files for a number of days or an amount of disk space. So you can recover those files if you accidentally delete them. So some nice new options, some fail-safe options for the new clear working folder. Okay. We're going to go back into DDM now. I want to do a final load on my assembly. If I go back to here and I load my assembly, we see the new load window. Now the new load window includes some of the old features. If you're loading something that has got an old issue of a file, it will warn you. If you've got something that is not recommended, it will warn you. And also if any of the files that you're loading need a parameter refresh, it will load you because they will need to be saved back to the database in order to clear the parameter refresh flag. When I load an assembly, it doesn't load the files one at a time. It will batch the files. So what it does is it's batched file loaded 5 files in one go, therefore speeding up the load process. So all in all, the loading of files and the saving of files in this new version is anywhere up to 10 times faster than the previous version, especially on a wide area network. Here is my assembly. So one final time. This time I'm going to load it, and when I load my assembly I will choose to close this window after load once you're familiar with what's happening. If I load it, it loads the assembly and then I can carry on. So some great new enhancements to the new SolidWorks interface to DDM in DDM 2024.07.